The rain hammered against the cracked windows of a small apartment on the south side of Chicago as Amara Johnson sat frozen on her worn-out couch, clutching an eviction notice in her trembling hands. 30 days, that was all she had left before she and her little girl would be put out on the streets. The medical bills from Zuri's recent surgery had drained everything she had saved, and her freelance design work barely covered groceries. Every rejection email she received from the companies she applied to felt like another door slamming in her face. "Mummy, are you crying?" Amara quickly looked up her 5-year-old daughter. Zuri stood in the doorway, holding her faded teddy bear tightly against her chest, her wide brown eyes filled with worry no child should have to carry. Forcing a smile, Amara wiped at her face and said softly, "No baby mummy, just got something in her eye." She folded the eviction notice, slipped it into her laptop bag, and told her daughter, "Go get ready for bed, I'll come read to you in a minute." Zuri nodded and padded off to their bedroom the moment she was gone. Amara collapsed back onto the couch, the weight of her exhaustion pressing down on her. On the coffee table, her laptop glowed with reminders of countless unanswered job applications she had sent, dozens in the last week, only to be met with silence or polite rejections. Her degree, her talent, her determination, none of it seemed to matter in a city with no space for a single black mother struggling to survive. Her phone buzzed, another notification from the job search app. Usually, they were worthless positions demanding impossible experience or offering barely enough to live on. But this one caught her attention. Personal assistant to high profile. Executive, immediate start, exceptional compensation, discretion required. The listed salary made her heart race. It was more money than she had ever imagined, enough to clear Zuri's medical bills, keep their home, and maybe even put something aside for her daughter's future. The posting felt vague, even suspicious. No company name, only a phone number and an email, but desperation drowned out doubt. Amara crafted a careful response, highlighting her organizational skills and her ability to manage confidential matters. She pressed send, her heart pounding. 5 minutes later, her phone rang. Miss Johnson, a crisp, commanding voice said, each word carrying the weight of authority. "My name is Terrence Cole. I represent a client who is interested in your services. Are you available for an interview tomorrow morning?" "Yes, of course," Amara replied quickly, snatching up a pen to take notes. "Could you tell me more about the position?" "Details will be provided in person. Arrive at Davenport Tower penthouse. Level 9 a.m. sharp. Bring identification. Come alone." The line went dead before she could ask anything. Amara lowered the phone slowly, her stomach a storm of fear and fragile hope. Davenport Tower was one of the most exclusive buildings in Chicago, home to CEOs, politicians, and billionaires. Whatever this job was, it was real, it was powerful, and it might be her only chance. The next morning, Amara stood in front of the towering glass facade of Davenport Tower, one of the most exclusive buildings in Chicago. She wore her only good business suit, a navy blue blazer and skirt that had been pressed the night before until the seams nearly gave way. She clutched her portfolio of design work in one hand and her bag in the other, her reflection in the polished doors showing a young woman trying to look confident, though fear and uncertainty churned beneath her calm exterior. The elevator doors opened and she stepped inside, pressing the button for the penthouse. The ride seemed endless as the floors ticked by. She stared at her reflection in the mirrored walls, adjusting her hair, steadying her breathing, and silently repeating the promise she made to Zuri that she would not fail. When the doors opened, the reception area before her looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel rather than an office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Contemporary art adorned the walls, and the air carried a subtle fragrance of polished wood and expensive cologne. A man in his 50s with perfectly tailored clothes approached her. His expression was reserved but polite, his presence as commanding as his deep voice. "Miss Johnson, I presume. I am Terrence Cole. We spoke on the phone." His handshake was firm, steady, and without warmth. "Please follow me. Mr. Davenport is waiting." They walked down a long hallway lined with original paintings Amara recognized from her art history classes works she had only seen in books and museums. Everything about this place radiated wealth, power, and control. At the end of the hall, Terence stopped at a pair of heavy double doors made of dark wood and knocked gently. Enter. Came a voice from inside. The office beyond was larger than Amara's entire apartment. A massive desk dominated one end of the room, behind which sat a man who looked to be in his mid-30s. Malik Davenport. His reputation in the city was the stuff of legends. Billionaire tech mogul, brilliant, ruthless, untouchable. In person, he was devastatingly handsome in a way that felt almost unreal, with sharp cheekbones, deep brown skin, and a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that likely cost more than Amara had earned in months. He didn't look up when she entered. His eyes stayed fixed on the screen in front of him, forcing her to stand there in silence for several long, uncomfortable moments. When he finally raised his gaze, she felt the full weight of it, as if he was studying her, cataloging her, and making judgments all at once. He said simply, gesturing toward one of the leather chairs across from his desk. Amara sat pressing her hands together in her lap to keep them from shaking. Malik leaned back in his chair, his eyes steady and unreadable. Mara Johnson, 26 years old, single mother to a 5-year-old daughter named Zuri, freelance designer, behind on rent. Facing eviction after your daughter's surgery left you buried in medical bills. He recited the facts of her life as if reading them from a script, but the way he looked at her told her he already knew every detail. Her throat tightened. How do you know all that? She whispered. Malik's gaze did not waver. I make it my business to know everything about the people I consider employing. He rose from his chair and circled the desk, moving toward her with an unhurried confidence that made her pulse quicken. He stopped close enough that she had to tilt her chin upward to look at him, his presence filling the room. The question, Miss Johnson, is whether you are desperate enough to accept the position I'm offering. Amara's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know what kind of job required this level of intrusion into her private life. She didn't know why this man seemed to hold her fate in his hands, but she did know one thing: whatever this was, it was about to change her life forever. Malik moved back to his chair with slow, measured steps, his eyes never leaving Amara. When he sat, his voice was calm but carried the weight of command, each word deliberate. I am Malik Davenport, CEO of Davenport Technologies. Am worth more than $8 billion. I have enemies who would do anything to destroy me, to steal from me, to use those closest to me as leverage. Whoever I hire as my personal assistant will have access to my schedule, my home, my most private dealings. That means I cannot afford weakness, carelessness, or disloyalty. Amara's mouth went dry. She had expected a job interview, not an interrogation that made her life feel like an open book. Expression didn't soften as he continued. The salary in the posting was not an exaggeration. $50,000 a month, full benefits, and a furnished apartment in one of my properties. That is what I am offering. The number struck Amara like a lightning bolt. $50,000 a month. It was more money than she had ever dreamed of, enough to erase every debt, enough to give Zuri a future. But even as her heart raced, suspicion crept into her voice. There has to be a catch. Malik opened a drawer and slid a thick document across the desk. The conditions are simple. First, you will sign a non-disclosure agreement. Violate it, and you will face legal consequences that will leave you ruined. Second, this position requires complete availability. You will live on my property and be on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Mara's heart sank. I have a daughter. I can't abandon her. Malik leaned forward, his voice firm but steady. I am not asking you to. There are elite schools near my estate. A nanny will be provided. Zuri will have the best care and education available. Your responsibilities will be here, but your daughter will never be neglected. For a moment, Amara felt a flicker of relief, but then Malik's tone shifted colder. Now, like steel beneath velvet, there is one more requirement. You may find it uncomfortable. Her stomach twisted. What kind of requirement? Malik stood and walked to the wide windows overlooking the city. He spoke without turning back to face her. Absolute loyalty requires absolute trust. Everyone who works in my home must undergo a complete security screening, a background check, financial records, and a physical examination to ensure you carry no recording devices or weapons. It is conducted by a licensed physician in a secure facility. Professional, discreet, but mandatory. Mara's breath caught. You mean Strip searches. He finally turned, his dark eyes locking on hers, sharp and unyielding. I mean security protocols that have prevented assassination attempts and countless acts of espionage. It is non-negotiable. The room fell into heavy silence. The only sound was the quiet hum of the air conditioning, as Amara's mind spun. The job offered salvation. It offered everything Zuri needed. But the thought of surrendering to such invasive control made her stomach twist. Malik returned to his chair, his voice even. You may take time to consider. But understand this, if you agree, there is no going back. Once you sign that contract and submit to the screening, you belong to me until I decide otherwise. The possessive way he said it sent a chill through Amara, but also stirred something deep inside her, something she didn't want to admit. She thought of Zuri's smile. She thought of the eviction notice still tucked away in her bag. She thought of the life she was desperate to hold together. Her voice trembled, but her decision was clear. If I agree, when do I start? Malik's gaze never left her. Immediately. The examination will be conducted this afternoon. You and your daughter can move into the apartment tonight. For the first time, Amara realized that Davenport was a man who always got what he wanted, when he wanted it. And right now, what he wanted was her. 3 hours later, Amara stood in a sterile, brightly lit medical room inside a private facility that bore Malik Davenport's name on every wall. The air smelled of disinfectant, and the silence was sharp, broken only by the sound of her own nervous breathing. She clutched the thin hospital gown Terence had given her, her hands trembling as though they belonged to someone else. Across from her stood Dr. Angela Brooks, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes but a no-nonsense tone that made clear there would be no bending of rules. Miss Johnson, I know this is uncomfortable, but I need you to understand this procedure is strictly professional and purely for security purposes. I've been conducting screenings for Mr. Davenport for more than 5 years. Everything will be handled with discretion. Amara nodded, her throat too tight to form words. She had signed the contract earlier, the ink still fresh, binding her with clauses that made escape impossible. Malik's reach extended farther than she had imagined. Please, remove all clothing and jewelry. I'll step outside while you change, Dr. Brooks said gently before leaving the room. With shaky hands, Amara undressed. The fluorescent lights above felt harsh and exposing, and the hospital gown offered little comfort. When Dr. Brooks returned, she carried a clipboard and a handheld scanner. Arms out, please. We'll begin with a sweep for electronic devices, then proceed with the examination. For the next 20 minutes, Amara endured the most invasive experience of her life. Dr. Brooks remained professional throughout, her voice calm, her manner precise. Yet every second made Amara feel stripped, not only of her clothes but of her control, her dignity, even her identity. She had never felt so powerless. Standing there in silence while her future was being measured in procedures she hadn't truly chosen. When it was finally over, Dr. Brooks set down her clipboard. You're clear. You may get dressed, Mr. Davenport. We'll be informed that you've passed the security screening. Amara put her clothes back on, her movements unsteady. She couldn't shake the thought that Malik had demanded this not just to protect himself, but to prove a point that he controlled everything, even her body's right to privacy. When she stepped out, Terence was waiting, his face unreadable. The car is ready to take you to your new residence. Your belongings and your daughter have already been moved. Zuri is safe. Mr. Davenport is expecting you both for dinner. The drive out of the city carried Amara into a world she had never known. The streets gave way to tree-lined roads and sprawling hills where iron gates guarded estates that stretched like kingdoms. Finally, the car turned into a long driveway leading to a modern glass and steel mansion that shimmered beneath the fading sun. This is the Davenport estate, Terence said. Your apartment is in the east wing. It is private, but connected to the main house. Zuri has already settled in with her nanny, Auntie Denise. Amara's chest tightened at the mention of her daughter. She had been so consumed by the job and its demands that she hadn't fully considered what it would mean for Zuri to suddenly live in a stranger's house. Her heart raced as the car stopped. She stepped out, staring up at the mansion that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, its sharp angles catching the last light of the day. Everything about it spoke of wealth, dominance, and power. Inside those walls, her life was no longer hers. Malik Davenport owned her future now. The apartment in the east wing of the Davenport estate was larger than any place Amara had ever lived. The polished floors gleamed, the furniture looked like it belonged in magazines, and the kitchen was stocked with everything she could imagine. Zuri's new bedroom was filled with dolls, books, and toys that must have cost thousands, yet they were already neatly arranged as if waiting just for her. The moment Amara walked through the door, Zuri ran straight into her arms. "Mummy, you have to see my room. It's huge. And the nanny lady, Auntie Denise, she's really nice. Look at all the toys they really mine." "Yes, sweetheart, they're yours," Amara said, holding her daughter tight, though unease lingered inside her. Everything here was too perfect, too well planned. She couldn't shake the question of what price would be demanded for such generosity. At exactly 7 o'clock, a knock sounded at the door. Terence stood waiting, polished as ever. "Mr. Davenport would like to see you and Miss Zuri for dinner." Amara straightened her blazer, took Zuri's hand, and followed him through the grand halls of the mansion. The dining room was formal and imposing, a long table that could easily seat 20, though tonight only 3 places were set. Malik sat at the head of the table, no longer in his suit but in dark slacks and a crisp white shirt. He looked relaxed, yet his presence filled the room the same way it had in his office. When Amara and Zuri entered, he rose. His voice was softer than before, though it still carried authority. "Zuri, welcome to my home." Zuri blinked at him, curious and unafraid. "Your house is really, really big. Do you live here all by yourself?" A flicker passed over Malik's face, something that looked almost like loneliness. "Most of the time, yes. But now, you and your mother are going to live here too. Would you like that?" Zuri grinned. "Yes. Can I see the swimming pool after dinner if Mummy says yes?" Malik's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but held warmth nonetheless. "If your mother agrees, then yes." Dinner felt surreal to Amara. Malik, the man who had ordered her to submit to humiliating rules, was surprisingly patient with Zuri, answering her endless questions about the house and even chuckling at her playful remarks. He listened to her chatter about her teddy bear and her favorite cartoons as though he had nothing more important in the world to do. But every time his eyes met Amara's across the table, the softness disappeared. In their silent exchanges, she felt only power, control, and an unspoken reminder that he owned the ground beneath her feet. When dinner ended, Auntie Denise took Zuri upstairs to get ready for bed, her cheerful voice filling the hallway as Zuri skipped along beside her. Amara turned to leave with them, but Malik's voice stopped her. "Stay. I'd like a word with you." The words weren't a request, they were an order. Amara followed him into a study lined with bookshelves and a fireplace that glowed with a low fire. This room felt more personal than the office tower, yet it carried the same atmosphere of dominance. Malik poured himself a glass of whiskey, offering her one with a small gesture. She shook her head. He studied her over the rim of his glass. "Your daughter is charming. She seems to have adjusted well to the change." "Children are resilient," Amara replied carefully, her voice steady though her chest tightened. "But this is still overwhelming." "For you, perhaps," Malik said, settling into a leather chair, his gaze never leaving hers. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. For the first time since she had stepped into his world, Amara understood what her decision meant. This was no ordinary job. This was bondage disguised as opportunity, and yet, as Malik's eyes lingered on her, a shiver ran through her that had nothing to do with fear. The firelight flickered across the walls of Malik's study, shadows stretching tall over the shelves of leather-bound books. Amara stood near the doorway, clutching her hands together to hide the faint tremor in them, while Malik watched her from his chair with that same unreadable calm. "What did you think of today's screening?" he asked finally, his voice low. and measured. Amara's face heated, her chest tightening as the memory flooded back. The harsh lights, the gown, the humiliation. "I thought it was degrading," she said quietly, her words slipping out before she could stop them. "Degrading," Malik repeated slowly, tasting the word as if it intrigued him. "And yet you submitted to it willingly." Her eyes narrowed. "I submitted to it because I need this job." He leaned forward, setting his glass down on the table beside him. "No, you submitted because you understand something most people never do. You don't have the luxury of choice. Not when it comes to survival. Not when it comes to protecting your daughter." The blunt truth in his words cut deep, but his voice carried no cruelty. It was calm, almost clinical, like a surgeon explaining a necessary incision. "I require absolute loyalty, Amara." That examination was not about humiliation, it was about establishing trust. "You now know I demand obedience, and I now know you're willing to give it." The way he spoke her name sent a shiver through her. It was the first time he had said it without the cold Miss Johnson. And somehow, that small shift carried more weight than all the threats he had implied. She tried to steady her breathing, to gather some shred of dignity. "What happens if I don't perform the way you expect?" Malik's gaze sharpened. A thin smile touched his lips, cold as winter air. "Then you'll find out just how much I know about you. Every debt you owe, every vulnerability you carry, every person you care about, I'll use all of it." The threat was delivered in the same tone he might use to discuss the weather, which made it more chilling than anger ever could. Amara's stomach knotted, but she lifted her chin. "I won't give you a reason to threaten me." "Good," Malik said, standing abruptly, signaling that their conversation was finished. "Your first day begins at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. Don't be late." As she walked back through the long halls toward her apartment, Amara felt the weight of her decision settle heavier on her shoulders than ever before. She had traded her freedom for stability. She had placed herself in the hands of a man who wielded his power like a weapon. But when she opened the door and found Zuri already asleep in her new bed, her small body curled peacefully among piles of toys and books, Amara knew she would endure anything if it meant her daughter's safety. She whispered a silent promise to herself. She would take his money, play his game, and give Zuri the life she deserved. But somehow, she would find a way to hold on to her dignity. What she didn't yet realize was that Malik Davenport had no intention of letting her keep it. Days turned into weeks, and Amara quickly learned that life inside Malik Davenport's empire demanded every ounce of her energy. Her mornings began before dawn, reviewing his packed schedule, answering calls, arranging meetings, and ensuring no detail was overlooked. By afternoon, she was traveling between the estate and the tower, shadowing him in boardrooms where his voice dominated the room and his presence silenced competitors. At night, she returned to the East Wing, exhausted yet restless, lying awake with the knowledge that her life was no longer her own. She had proven herself sharp, efficient, and unshakably reliable. Malik began to trust her judgment, letting her handle decisions that others would have begged to make. He was demanding, but never sloppy. He expected perfection, and Amara delivered. But it was the quiet evenings that troubled her most. When the mansion grew still, when Zuri was asleep in her room, and Auntie Denise read quietly in the corner, Malik would invite Amara to join him for dinner in his study. At first, these meals were coldly formal discussions of contracts, travel plans, stock prices. Yet, over time, they shifted. One evening, she caught him watching Zuri as she laughed at a joke Auntie Denise told. His expression softened for just a moment, almost like a man who remembered what it felt like to care. Another night, when he handed Amara a stack of documents, his hand lingered a fraction longer than necessary, his fingers brushing hers with a charge she couldn't ignore. There was an attraction growing between them, silent but undeniable, dangerous in its pull. Amara told herself it was nothing, that it was just exhaustion and the intensity of their situation. But she knew the truth. Davenport terrified her with his threats, yet something about his presence drew her in all the same. Meanwhile, Zuri flourished, She loved her new school, made friends easily, and spoke about Malik as though he were already part of their family. "He listens to me, Mummy," she said one morning as Amara braided her hair. "He's not scary like he looks. I think he's nice." Amara didn't answer. She couldn't tell her daughter that the man she admired was the same man who held her mother's freedom by the throat. Still, the contradiction haunted her. Malik Davenport, the ruthless billionaire, was slowly becoming the man her daughter trusted. And despite every warning bell in her heart, Amara felt herself being pulled deeper into his orbit. She knew the cost of that pull could be everything she had left. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when Amara's carefully built routine began to unravel. She was in Malik's study, organizing files for an upcoming board meeting. Her hands moved quickly, practiced now in navigating his meticulous system. But when she leaned to gather a stack she had accidentally knocked over, one folder slid free and landed at her feet. Her name was on the cover. Frowning, she picked it up. Curiosity pricked at her, and before she could remind herself to leave it alone, she opened it. Inside were pages upon pages of her life, far beyond anything Malik had admitted to knowing. There were photographs of her and Zuri taken weeks before she had even applied for the job. Copies of Zuri's medical records, transcripts of phone calls with her friends, surveillance reports of her daily routines, tracking her from her apartment to the grocery store to the hospital. Her stomach turned cold. This wasn't a background check. Malik had been watching her, studying her, planning for her, long before she even knew he existed. "You weren't supposed to see that." His voice cut through the silence. Amara spun around, the folder clutched. In her shaking hands, Malik stood in the doorway, his face unreadable, his eyes locked on hers. "You were stalking me," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "For weeks before I even applied, you were following me, digging through my life." "I was researching a potential employee," he replied evenly, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "This goes beyond research," Amara snapped, her voice rising. "You investigated my daughter's medical condition, my finances, my relationships. You manipulated me into applying for this job." Malik's expression didn't shift, but his voice carried a darker edge now. "I identified someone with the skills I needed and the motivation to accept my terms. Everything that happened after was your choice." "Choice?" Amara laughed bitterly, though her throat ached. "What choice did I have? You knew I was desperate. You knew I would do anything for Zuri." Malik moved closer, his presence filling the room until she backed against his desk. His gaze bore into hers, not with cruelty, but with intensity that felt almost raw. "I gave you an opportunity. That changed your life. Your daughter is healthy, cared for, and receiving the best education money can buy. You're financially secure for the first time in years. Tell me, how exactly have you been harmed by my actions?" Her voice cracked, caught between fury and despair. "You lied to me. You stripped away my dignity. You made me believe I had a choice when this was all a trap from the beginning." For the first time since she had known him, Malik's composure wavered. His voice dropped, rougher now, more vulnerable. "Do you really think this was just about hiring an assistant? You think I go to these lengths for everyone who works for me? Then what was it about?" she whispered, her heart pounding. Malik stared at her, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with something she had never seen before. "I saw you at the hospital when Zuri was having surgery. You were exhausted, terrified, but you never left her side. You sold your car to pay for her medication. You worked 3 extra jobs just to keep her alive. I watched you fight with nothing but love and determination. And for the first time in years, I saw someone real. Someone who wasn't trying to use me. Someone I couldn't ignore." Amara's anger faltered, confusion flooding in. "You were at the hospital." "I donate to the children's wing," Malik admitted quietly. "I was there for a meeting. I saw you, Amara, and I couldn't look away." Her chest tightened, her breath uneven. "So you decided to buy me. Like everything else in your life, I decided to give you what you needed," he said, stepping closer, his voice low, almost pleading. And to see if you might choose to give me what I needed in return. And, what do you need, Malik? The words trembled from her lips. Instead of answering, he lifted his hand and cupped her face. His touch was warm, steady, and the intensity in his eyes left no room for denial. You, he said simply. Before she could respond, his mouth found hers. The kiss was soft at first, almost hesitant, but when she didn't pull away, it deepened hungry. Desperate, filled with the tension that had been building between them for months, her body betrayed her anger, responding with equal urgency. Her hands clutching his shirt, as though letting go would leave her broken. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard, their foreheads pressed together, the silence heavy with everything unspoken. This complicates everything, Amara whispered, her voice unsteady. Everything was already complicated, Malik replied, his thumb brushing her cheek. The question is whether you can forgive me for the way this started, and give us a chance at something real. For the first time since stepping into his world, Amara felt the ground shift beneath her in a way that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with desire. The study door burst open before Amara could respond to Malik's question. Terence followed close behind, his face tight with frustration. Behind him swept in Vanessa Carter, Malik's former business partner and ex-lover. Her platinum blonde wig sharp against her designer dress, her eyes glittering with spite. "Apologize, sir," Terence said quickly, his voice stiff. Miss Carter insisted she couldn't wait. Well, Vanessa said with a cruel smile as her gaze swept over the scene, the closeness between Amara and Malik, the heat still lingering in the air. "No wonder you've been distracted lately, Malik. Playing house with the help?" Malik's jaw tightened, and he stepped in front of Amara protectively. "You weren't invited, Vanessa." "No," she replied smoothly, "but I think I should have been. Especially since I've been doing some investigating of my own." Amara's stomach twisted. There was something in Vanessa's eyes, something calculated. Vanessa pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. "Did you know that your precious assistant has been sneaking around, photographing documents, digging into your business practices?" She turned the screen toward Malik, showing a series of photos. There was Amara, standing at Malik's desk, late at night, papers in hand, the camera angle grainy but damning. Amara's blood ran cold. "That's not true, Malik. It's not what it looks like." But Malik's expression had already changed. His warmth closing off, his face hardening into the cold mask she feared. "You were photographing my files?" His voice was sharp, dangerous. "I was trying to protect you," Amara said quickly, desperation in her voice. "Some of the contracts didn't make sense. I thought Vanessa might be trying to sabotage you. I was looking for proof." Vanessa's smile widened. "Or maybe you were looking for something to sell? How convenient, Moloch, your little pet snooping into your secrets, just as the FBI begins circling." The words hit like a blow. Moloch turned his gaze back to Amara, suspicion cutting deep. "The FBI?" Amara's hands trembled. "A detective came to see me, yes. But I told him nothing. I swear to you, Malik, I told him nothing. You didn't tell me he contacted you." His voice was ice. "I was afraid you wouldn't believe me. I was afraid you'd think I was working with them." Silence pressed heavy between them, broken only by Vanessa's soft, satisfied laugh. "Face it, Malik, she's a liability, and you know, I've always been the one you can trust." Amara turned on her anger, breaking through her fear. "This is all you, isn't it? You're setting me up. This timing, these pictures, it's too perfect." For just a moment, Vanessa's smile faltered, and Malik caught it too. His sharp eyes narrowed. "What do you want, Vanessa?" She dropped the pretense, her voice sharp and greedy. "The same thing I've always wanted. Partnership. 50% of Davenport Technologies. Or I release what I know about your list. Dealings. You have 24 hours to decide." She moved toward the door, then paused with a smirk. "Oh, and Malik, you might want to ask your little assistant what Detective Ryan Walsh wanted when he visited her apartment." Apparently, The FBI is very interested in your empire. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving only silence. Malik turned back to Amara, his expression unreadable. A detective came to you, he said finally. Yes, she whispered, her voice breaking. But I told him nothing. You have to believe me. He walked to the window, his gaze fixed on the gardens outside, where Zuri was laughing with Auntie Denise. His voice was quiet, almost detached. Maybe you should be cooperating with them. Amara's chest tightened. What do you mean? Maybe. You should take your daughter and disappear before this gets worse. I can arrange new identities. Enough money to start over somewhere safe. Amara stared at him, shocked. You want me to leave? I want you to be safe, Malik said, turning to face her. For the first time, she saw pain in his eyes, stripped bare of all pretense. Vanessa is right about one thing. Some of my business does exist in gray areas. The FBI is circling, and if they are watching me, then they are watching you. Zer doesn't deserve that kind of danger. Tears stung her eyes as she shook her head. And what about you? His bitter smile said everything. I'll survive. I always do. Amara stepped closer, her voice firm even as her body shook. No. You don't get to push me away. You said you needed me, Malik, and the truth is, I need you too. We'll fight this together. He caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek, his eyes closing as though her touch anchored him. You don't understand what you're saying. If you fight this with me, there's no turning back. Your life will never be simple again. Amara lifted her chin, her voice steady with conviction. My life stopped being simple the moment I walked into your office. I'd rather live a complicated life with you than a safe one without you. For the first time, Malik pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as though letting go would mean losing everything. Then we fight, he whispered. And in that moment, Amara knew she had stepped past the point of no return. 6 months later, the courtroom was packed with reporters, their cameras flashing as the judge delivered the verdict. Vanessa Carter was found guilty on 12 counts of corporate espionage, fraud, and extortion. Her scheme to frame Malik, to tear apart his empire and his life, had collapsed under the weight of her own lies. Detective Walsh's investigation revealed how Vanessa manipulated evidence and planted false accusations. Malik, instead of resisting, had shocked everyone by cooperating fully with the FBI. He admitted to the questionable business practices that had kept him in power for so long. He paid heavy fines, surrendered old contracts, and agreed to restructure Davenport Technologies with full transparency and oversight. He didn't walk away unscathed, but he walked away free and, more importantly, changed. Amara sat in the front row with Zuri's small hand clasped in hers. She watched Malik shake hands with his legal team, his head held high. No longer a man chained to secrecy and fear, but one who had chosen a different path. Is Malik coming home with us today? Zuri asked softly, tugging at her sleeve. Amara smiled, her heart swelling as Malik's eyes found hers across the room. Yes, baby Malik's coming home. That evening, they sat together on the patio of their new house. It wasn't the vast glass and steel mansion. It was smaller, warmer, a place they had chosen together. Inside, Auntie Denise was laughing with Zuri over a bedtime story, the sound floating through the open doors. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold as Malik wrapped his arm around Amara's shoulders. Any regrets? He asked quietly. About which part? She teased softly. Taking the job. Falling in love with you? Standing by you when the world tried to tear you down. His eyes searched hers, vulnerable in a way that still surprised her, all of it. She turned to him, her voice steady. The only thing I regret is that it took us so long to trust each other completely. He kissed her then, slow and full of promise. When they pulled apart, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Dropping to one knee beside her chair, Malik opened it, revealing a simple, elegant ring. I know our beginning was far from perfect, he said, his deep voice carrying both strength and humility. But I also know you are the only woman I've ever trusted with my heart. Amara Johnson, Will you marry me? Not because you need me. Not because I can provide for you and Zuri, but because you love me. Her eyes filled with tears as she pressed her hands over her mouth. The man who once terrified her, the man who had bought her obedience, was now on his knees offering her choice. Yes, she whispered, her voice breaking with joy. Yes, I'll marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger just as Zuri came running onto the patio, her curls bouncing as she leaped into her mother's lap. Why are you crying, Mummy? She asked, tilting her head. Happy tears, Amara said, hugging her tight. Malik just asked me to marry him. Zuri's eyes widened, sparkling with excitement. Does that mean he'll be my daddy? Malik leaned over, smoothing her hair back with a tenderness that was once hidden beneath steel. If you want me to be, Zuri threw her arms around his neck, her voice muffled against his shoulder. I want that more than anything. The three of them sat together as the stars began to appear, the night wrapping around them like a blessing. Amara thought back to the beginning, the eviction notice, the desperation, the whispered words she had spoken in fear. Please, don't make me. But those words had transformed into something else entirely. She had chosen to give him her trust, chosen to let love replace fear, chosen to build a family out of the most unlikely beginning. Her life would never be simple again. But, as she felt Malik's arm around her and heard Zuri's soft laughter, she knew complicated was exactly where she belonged.